White judge finds black woman only to learn. She's a former FBI agent. Part 1. Robert Bennett sat tall in his judge's chair, looking down at the crowded courtroom. His blue eyes were tired after 4 hours of traffic cases. The morning had been long and his patience was wearing thin. "Next case," he called out, his voice firm. Victoria Morris walked forward. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a worn leather bag. Her dark skin contrasted with the mostly white faces in the courtroom. She stood straight, looking directly at the judge. "Ms. Morris, you are here for speeding, 55 miles per hour in a 35 zone. Your third offense this year," Judge Bennett said, without looking up from her file. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Victoria cleared her throat. "Your Honor, I can explain the situation if you would." "I've heard all the excuses," Judge Bennett cut her off. "Late for work, family emergency. Didn't see the sign. The fine is $250. Victoria tried again. "Sir, if I could just have a moment to—" "Pay the clerk on your way out," Judge Bennett said, already looking at the next file. "Next case." Victoria's shoulders dropped slightly, but her eyes showed no fear. She turned to leave, and as she did, a small black wallet fell from her bag. It opened on the floor, showing a golden badge inside. Judge Bennett noticed it but said nothing as Victoria quickly picked it up. Something about that badge seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. He moved on to the next case, forgetting about the woman and her badge. Outside the courtroom, Victoria pulled out her phone and made a call. "Director Phillips? It's Morris. I got another speeding ticket." She paused, listening. "No, I couldn't. Explain. The judge wouldn't let me speak." Another pause. "Yes, I know the operation is tonight. I'll be there. This won't get in the way." She ended the call and looked back at the courthouse doors. 20 years in the FBI leading major operations, and still people judged her before knowing anything about her. Later that day, Judge Bennett sat in his office going through case files. His secretary knocked on the door. "Sir, there's an urgent call for you. Something about the Wilson trafficking case." Judge Bennett picked up the phone. "This is Judge Bennett." "Judge, this is Director Phillips from the FBI. We need to meet with you urgently about the Wilson case. Our lead agent will be at your office tomorrow morning at 9. "I'll be here," Judge Bennett replied, curious about the case that had been making headlines for weeks. That evening, Judge Bennett drove home, thinking about his day. Had he been too harsh? Too quick to judge? His wife Mary always said he needed to listen more. Perhaps she was right. At home, the news was on TV. A reporter stood outside the city police station. Sources say the FBI is close to breaking the Wilson trafficking ring, one of the largest human trafficking operations in the country. The case is expected to reach court soon, with Judge Robert Bennett presiding. Bennett turned up the volume, interested. The reporter continued. "The operation has been led by one of the FBI's top agents whose identity remains confidential for security reasons." Judge Bennett turned off the TV and went to bed, unaware that tomorrow would change everything he thought he knew about Victoria Morris and about himself. The end of Part 1. White judge finds black woman, only to learn she's a former FBI agent. Part 2. At exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, Judge Robert Bennett heard a knock on his office door. "Come in," he called out, not looking up from his papers. The door opened, and Judge Bennett heard footsteps approaching his desk. When he finally raised his eyes, he froze. Standing before him was Victoria Morris, the woman he had fined yesterday. But today she looked different. She wore a smart black suit and had her hair pulled back. Most importantly, she had an FBI badge clearly displayed on her belt. "Good morning, Judge Bennett. I'm Special Agent Victoria Morris, lead investigator on the Wilson trafficking case." The judge couldn't hide his surprise. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He stood up quickly, knocking his pen to the floor. "Agent Morris, Please sit down," he managed to say, pointing to the chair across from his desk. Victoria sat down calmly, placing a thick folder on his desk. "The Wilson case will be in your court next week. There are security matters we need to discuss." "Judge," Bennett tried to focus on her words, but his mind kept going back to yesterday. He had dismissed her so quickly, not giving her even a moment to explain herself. "Agent Morris," he began, his voice softer than usual. "About yesterday." "That's not why I'm here, Your Honor," Victoria cut him off. "The Wilson case involves dangerous people. We need to talk about courtroom security." For the next hour, they discussed the case. Victoria explained how the trafficking ring had operated for years, moving people across borders like cargo. She had worked on the case for 3 years, often undercover. "Those speeding tickets," Judge Bennett said suddenly. "They happened during your investigation?" Victoria nodded. "I was following suspects. I couldn't explain that in open court." Judge Bennett felt a wave of shame wash over him. How many others had he judged unfairly? How many stories had he refused to hear? As Victoria was leaving, Judge Bennett spoke up again. "Agent Morris, I want to apologize for yesterday. I was wrong not to listen to you." Victoria paused at the door. "Thank you, Judge. But this isn't about me. It's about making sure justice is served in the Wilson case." Over the next few days, Judge Bennett found himself thinking about Victoria Morris often. He began looking through his old cases, wondering how many times he had failed to listen, failed to see the whole person standing before him. On Friday, a junior clerk knocked on his door. "Sir, Agent Morris is here again. She says it's urgent." Victoria entered, her face serious. "We've received a threat against the courthouse. The Wilson gang knows we're close to taking them down." She handed him a note. "This was left at the FBI office this morning." Judge Bennett read the note, his face growing pale. It threatened both him and Victoria by name. "We need to increase security," Victoria said, "and I think you should stay somewhere safe until the trial starts." "What about you?" Judge Bennett asked. "You're in danger too." Victoria smiled slightly. "This isn't my first dangerous case, Judge." As they made arrangements for his safety, Judge Bennett saw Victoria in a new light. Her dedication to justice, her courage in the face of danger, these were qualities he had missed when she stood before him as just another face in his courtroom. That evening, as police officers escorted him to a safe house, Judge Bennett promised himself that when this was over, he would become a better judge. He would listen more and judge less. He would see the people, not just their offenses, and he would start by truly hearing Victoria Morris's story. The end of Part 2. White judge finds black woman only to learn she's a former FBI agent. Part 3. 1 week had passed since Judge Robert Bennett moved to the safe house. The small cottage on the edge of town was guarded by 2 police officers at all times. Judge Bennett felt like a prisoner, pacing the small rooms and looking out of windows. On Tuesday evening, there was a knock at the door. One of the officers opened it carefully. Victoria Morris stood there holding a folder and a bag of food. "Agent Morris to see you, sir," the officer said. Victoria walked in, placing the bag on the kitchen table. "I thought you might be tired of microwave meals," she said. The smell of fresh bread and hot soup filled the small room. Judge Bennett nodded his thanks, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. As they ate, Victoria updated him on the case. "We've arrested 2 more members of the Wilson gang. The trial starts in 3 days." "Have there been more threats?" Judge Bennett asked. Victoria hesitated. "Yes, but we're handling it." After dinner, they went over case files. The hours passed quickly as they worked. Around midnight, Victoria stood up to leave. "Wait," Judge Bennett said. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Victoria sat back down, waiting. "How did you become an FBI agent? It's not an easy path." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke softly. "My father was a cleaner at the courthouse for 30 years. Every day he would come home and tell me stories about the judges and lawyers. He wanted me to be a lawyer." She smiled at the memory. "What changed?" Judge Bennett asked. "When I was 16, my best friend Lily disappeared. She was taken by a trafficking ring." Victoria's eyes grew distant. "The police didn't do much. Said she probably ran away. But I knew Lily. She wouldn't leave without telling me. Judge Bennett leaned forward, listening closely. I promised myself I would find her. I studied criminal justice, joined the police, then the FBI. Every trafficking case I work on, I'm looking for Lily. Did you ever find her? Judge Bennett asked gently. Victoria shook her head. No, but I've helped find other people's lilies. That matters too. They sat in silence for a while. Then Victoria spoke again. Your father was a judge too, wasn't he? Judge. Bennett looked surprised. Yes, how did you know? I do my research, Victoria smiled. Was he a good judge? The best, Judge Bennett said proudly. Fair, patient, always listening to both sides. His smile faded. Nothing like me. That's not true, Victoria said. You're trying to be better. That counts for something. Before she left, Victoria handed him a small notebook. These are stories from trafficking survivors. Read them if you have time. It helps to understand who we're fighting for. That night, Judge Bennett couldn't sleep. He read the stories Victoria had given him, tales of fear and hope, of people looking for better lives but finding nightmares instead. In the morning, he called Victoria. I want to meet them, he said. The survivors, before the trial. That's not usual procedure, Victoria replied. Please, Judge Bennett said. I need to hear their stories. Not as a judge, just as a person. There was a pause on the line. Then Victoria spoke. I'll arrange it, but not at the courthouse. Somewhere. They feel safe. As he hung up, Judge Bennett felt something changing inside him. For the first time in years, he was seeing beyond the law to the people it was meant to protect. The end of Part 3. White judge finds black woman, only to learn. She's a former FBI agent, Part 4. The community center stood in the poorest part of town. Judge Robert Bennett felt out of place as he walked through the doors. Victoria Morris waited for him inside, talking quietly with a group of 5 people. Judge Bennett, Victoria said when she saw him. Thank you for coming. The group looked at him with careful eyes. Bennett could feel their distrust. He had sentenced many people from this neighborhood over the years. These are the survivors I told you about, Victoria explained. They've agreed to share their stories, but only if you promise it won't affect the trial. You have my word, Judge Bennett said, looking at each person in turn. For the next 2 hours, he listened. A young man named David told how he came to the country looking for work, only to have his passport taken. He worked 16 hours a day in a factory, never seeing a penny. A woman named Lucy spoke of being moved from house to house, forced to cook and clean for the Wilson gang. Each story was different, but they all shared the same pain, the loss of freedom. When they finished talking, Judge Bennett sat in silence. His throat felt tight. These weren't just case numbers or legal terms, these were real people with real lives. Thank you, he finally said. I know this wasn't easy. As they were leaving, an older woman approached him. Her name was Grace, and she had been the last to share her story. You look like him, you know, she said quietly. Like who? Judge Bennett asked. Your father, Judge William Bennett. He helped my sister many years ago. Listened to her when no one else would. Grace smiled sadly. Not many judges take the time to really listen. Judge Bennett didn't know what to say. His father had never talked much about his cases at home. Outside, Victoria was waiting by her car. Did you get what you needed? She asked. Yes, Judge Bennett replied. And more. He looked back at the community center. I never knew my father came here. Every Thursday for 20 years, Victoria said. He started a legal advice clinic. Helped a lot of people. They drove back to the safe house in silence. Judge Bennett was lost in thought, wondering what else he didn't know about his father and about the people who came through his courtroom. That night, as he was getting ready for bed, Judge Bennett heard a noise outside. He looked out the window and saw one of the police officers falling to the ground. Before he could react, the bedroom door burst open. Two men with covered faces rushed in. "Time to go, Judge," one said, pointing a gun at him. Judge Bennett had no choice but to go with them. They tied his hands and put him in the back of a van. As they drove, he tried to memorize every turn, every sound. His heart was racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. After what felt like hours, the van stopped. The men pulled him out and into an old warehouse. Inside, a tall man was waiting. "Judge Bennett," the man said with a cold smile. "I'm Richard Wilson. I believe you're overseeing my case." Judge Bennett stood as straight as he could. "You won't get away with this." Wilson laughed. "I already have. By this time tomorrow you'll have had a terrible accident and a new judge will take over my case. Someone more understanding." Just then, a phone rang. Wilson answered it, listened for a moment, then his face changed. "What? How?" He barked orders to his men who rushed out, leaving only one guard with Bennett. Minutes passed, then gunshots. The guard ran to the door, gun ready. It burst open and the guard fell back, shot in the shoulder. Victoria Morris stood in the doorway. Gun raised, FBI agents behind her. "FBI, drop your weapons!" Victoria shouted. Wilson reached for his gun, but Victoria was faster. She shot him in the leg and he fell to the ground, crying out in pain. As an agent untied Judge Bennett, he looked at Victoria in amazement. "How did you find me?" he asked. Victoria smiled slightly. "I put a tracker in your watch when I brought you dinner last night, just in case." The end of Part 4. White judge finds black woman, only to learn she's a former FBI agent. Part 5. The trial of Richard Wilson began on a Monday morning. The courthouse was filled with reporters and curious onlookers. Judge Robert Bennett entered the courtroom with a calm face, showing no sign of his recent ordeal. Victoria Morris sat at the front of the room with the prosecution team. She nodded slightly to the judge as he took his seat. The bruise on her cheek from the rescue mission was still visible, but she held herself with quiet strength. As Wilson was brought in, Judge Bennett studied the man who had tried to kill him. Wilson looked smaller now without his guns and his men. Their eyes met briefly and Wilson looked away first. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Each day, more details of the trafficking ring came to light. Judge Bennett listened carefully to every witness, giving them time to tell their stories. When survivors testified, he made sure they were treated with respect by everyone in the courtroom. On the final day, before the jury went to decide, Judge Bennett did something unusual. He thanked each person who had testified against Wilson, acknowledging their courage. The courtroom fell silent at this break from normal procedure. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all charges, Judge Bennett prepared to give his sentence. The room was completely quiet. "Richard Wilson," he began, his voice clear and strong. "You have been found guilty of human trafficking, kidnapping, and attempted murder. These crimes deserve the harshest punishment the law allows." Wilson stared at the floor, his face hard. "But before I give your sentence, I want to speak to those you have harmed." Judge Bennett turned to the survivors sitting in the courtroom. "Your courage has stopped this man from hurting others. Your voices have been heard and believed." He then turned back to Wilson. "I sentence you to 30 years in prison with no chance of early release." As Wilson was led away, Victoria approached the judge's bench. "Thank you," she said simply. "No, thank you, Agent Morris," Judge Bennett replied. "You saved my life," Victoria smiled. "Just doing my job." 6 months later, a new program started at the courthouse. Every new judge spent a day at the community center, listening to people's stories. Judge Bennett had started it, using money from his father's estate. Victoria Morris came to the opening ceremony. She and Judge Bennett had become friends in the months since the trial. She had even helped him improve the program, bringing in people from different parts of the community. "What made you change?" Victoria asked him as they walked through the center. Judge Bennett thought for a moment. "Meeting you," he said finally, "seeing how quick I was to judge without listening. And then hearing those stories. He stopped, walking. Every person who comes into my courtroom has a story. I just wasn't listening before. Victoria nodded. And now? Now I listen. It's not always easy, and sometimes the law is still the law. But I try to see the whole person, not just their mistakes. As they reached the main room, they saw new judges sitting with community members listening and learning. Judge Bennett felt a warm sense of pride. This was his father's real legacy, taking time to hear people's stories. Victoria touched his arm lightly. I have news, she said. I've been promoted. I'll be leading the anti-trafficking unit. Congratulations, Judge Bennett said warmly. Will you still be looking for Lily? Victoria's eyes grew soft. Always. But now I have more resources, more help. As they watched the new judges learning to listen, Judge Bennett thought about how one traffic court case had changed his whole life, how one person he had dismissed had ended up teaching him the most important lesson of all, that behind every face is a story that deserves to be heard. The end.